I'm Mike Hanwald, field agronomist with Beck's Hybrid, standing here in a corn plot today and taking a look at the condition of this crop as we progress through the month of October here. So I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that our corn is a little bit wetter than what we'd like to see it at this point of the year if you've been out checking your corn moistures as we've been doing here today. And I think that's due to a few things. So number one, it's been a cooler growing season that we've experienced. We're behind normal in heat accumulation measured by growing degree units. And the last time that we were this cool for a growing season as a whole was in 2014. And so this is kind of a 1 in 10 year event that we've been experiencing here. And that's something to keep in mind as we go through harvest and see this wetter corn, that we may not necessarily want to make drastic changes to our operation based on this 1 year, because this year is a little bit of an anomaly. But when you evaluate corn dry down, it's also important to look at the potential of dry down going forward. So just because this corn's wet doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to dry down a whole lot over the next few weeks. So when we look at that, between 35 and 25% moisture, it takes 25 to 30 growing degree units to dry 1 point of moisture during that time. And once we get below 25%, that drying slows down, where it takes 40 to 45 growing degree units to dry that. And so as we look at our forecast over the second half of October, unfortunately, there's not a lot of heat in the forecast. And so when we look at a lot of days of a high of in the low 60s, so a 60-degree day of the high, you're only going to accumulate 5 GDUs that day, which then in turn takes 6 or more days to take out 1 point of moisture. And so as we look between now and the 1st of November, unfortunately, we're looking at the potential for 2, maybe 2.5 or 3 points of moisture that we're going to be able to take out of this crop. And as we think about that, waiting for the corn to dry and leaving it out in the field longer might not be the best decision, because the drying potential is limited, but also because of some of the issues that are starting to arise in this crop due to the weather conditions this crop has experienced. So first of all, we think back to June and the dry conditions that we experienced then. And when we have dry soils, our nutrients are not as mobile, particularly nitrogen and potassium. And nitrogen and potassium are 2 of the most important nutrients when it comes to stalk strength and standability. And so in turn then, we see the corn now utilizing more of the nutrients stored in the stalk to fill out the ear, which contributes to good yield potential. And most of the corn that I've been in, I know there's certainly exceptions across the state, but most of the fields look like they have pretty decent potential this year. However, due to that limited nutrient uptake early, it's limiting the strength of our stalks. And so while we haven't seen any widespread disasters in standability yet, we don't want to leave this crop stand out in the field any longer than what we have to, because our stalks just aren't quite at 100% strength. Secondly, we've started to see the development of some ear molds. I think that's traced back to the cool, damp conditions that we had in August and September. I know we didn't have a lot of rain during that time period, but almost every morning we had a thick, heavy dew, and that accumulates at the tip of the ear underneath that husk. And so we're starting to see some ear molds develop. That's been fairly spotty across the state, but we do have some pockets where those are developing. And again, harvesting a little bit earlier is going to stop the development of those molds once we get that grain dried down. Lastly, we have seen a lot of disease pressure this year, tar spot in particular. In fields that were sprayed with a fungicide, sprayed timely, for the most part, I think that held off the tar spot long enough that allowed the corn to fill out with full yield potential. While you're seeing that the corn is full of tar spot at this point, I think most of this tar spot came in late enough that it didn't hurt our yield potential, because that fungicide held it off. However, fields that were not sprayed with a fungicide, especially later planted fields or fuller maturity corn, we need to keep an eye on those, because the more disease pressure you have, the more stress that puts on that plant, which can lead to the potential for, again, reduced stalk strength even further, especially if that plant died prematurely. So some things to look at in your fields. As you're evaluating the potential for stalk issues or for ear molds, I made a video last year that I think does a pretty good job of explaining what to look for in the field, how to identify the different types of molds, and how to evaluate stalk strength. And I'm going to add that to the end of this video, so if you're interested in that, feel free to stay tuned. As always, if you have any questions about these or any other agronomic topics, feel free to reach out to myself or your local Beck's representative. This year, one of the things that we've starting to see is some ear molds in the corn, and I think that can be traced back to some stress that we had at pollination time, followed by the cool, wet weather that we've been experiencing here recently. Those are the conditions that favor ear mold development. And so, a couple of different ones that we're seeing out here, I wanted to point out so you can see the difference. So, first one here is trichoderma, and it's green in color. Aspergillus is also a green ear mold, but Aspergillus normally only shows up in drought year, and we're obviously not in a drought right now. This looks terrible, and you can see it even has some kernels that are starting to sprout. But the thing with trichoderma is it doesn't form any toxins, and so it looks awful and it does impact our grain quality, but it's not going to be extremely detrimental like some of the other ear molds that actually produce toxins. So the one that we're a little more concerned about is Gibberella ear mold. So an early stage of Gibberella has some white color to it. As you can see on this ear, it's starting to form. Now, when it's still white, we don't know for sure whether it's Gibberella or whether it's Diplodia, because Diplodia will start off white and stay white. Diplodia does not produce a toxin. However, this earlier in the process, we want to act as if this is Gibberella, because Gibberella produces what we commonly hear of as vomitoxin, and that can be pretty detrimental. Gibberella will turn a pink color, and so you can see this ear is showing that mold a little bit more advanced. You can see that pink coloration to it, and when it's pink near the tip, that tells you it's Gibberella, and so it has the potential to produce vomitoxin, which the vomitoxin is obviously the most detrimental piece of ear molds, leading to potential discounts in the grain at the elevator. So best things we can do as far as managing for these is just take the time to scout the field, identify which fields we're seeing these in, and then maybe move those fields a little bit higher on the priority list, get that corn shelled. If we have to haul corn out of the field directly to the elevator in the fall, this is the corn to get rid of a little bit sooner. But if you do need to store it in the bin, it's not a big deal. It can be stored successfully. Just needs a little bit different management. So getting that corn dried down below 15% as quickly as possible. Prefer to set the dryer around 14 so that you make sure that you're getting it under that 15%. And if you can keep it that dry and manage it well in the bin, then it won't those molds won't continue to develop in the bin, and that will help reduce your potential for having vomitoxin show up when you haul that grain into the elevator. The other thing that we're looking for in a cornfield is just looking for overall health of the plant, and then stalk strength for this late season scouting. So you can see here we got good stay green in this field, and then the simple push test, just pushing on the stalks. Now with as much green as what we're seeing here, I wouldn't expect to see any weaknesses from pushing, but you can pinch the lower stalks and see how they feel. But the best way to evaluate stalk strength is to split the stalk open, and so you can take a look here. We got a nice healthy crown, good and firm. We're not seeing any rotting. That yellowish white color is exactly what we want to see, and it's firm and healthy all the way up the stalk. And so this particular plant that I dug up and split open, in this particular area of the field, we got real good standability that we're looking at. Now in this particular field, I had the opportunity to fly the drone over the field, and you can see in the drone picture that there's some pretty drastic differences in the color of the corn. The area that we were just looking at, the corn looked green and healthy, and then this field has some higher sand ridges on it that tend to dry out, and you can see those sand ridges really apparent in this picture. Now when we come to one of the fields in the sand ridges, you can see here that this corn is much more brown and drier, a lot less stay green, and I think that comes down to the fact that we had those dry weeks in June where this corn was really struggling being on sandy soils, and then also as the sand just doesn't hold the water quite as well throughout the year to maintain that plant health as the area of the field that we were just in. Now you can see that we've got some really nice looking ears on this, and this corn is still going to yield fairly well for being on a pretty light sand that we see here, and I think that's due to the late season rains that we've had. However, as we do our push test and then our pinch test, we come down here low and pinch the stalk. We can tell that there's just not as much integrity to these stalks in this area, and you can see that here as we split one open. So compared to that stalk that we just looked at, you can see we've got some hollowing out that's happening, and I think this comes back to that dry weather that we had in June, where when the stalk was forming and that the stalk strength was really getting established, the corn didn't have as many resources, and especially on the sand ridges is suffering a little bit. So it's not necessarily a widespread issue that we need to be looking for, but just something to look out for as we're scouting our fields and going to those different soil types in different areas and identifying where we might have some more risks. So in this particular case, it looks like it's still going to be some great yielding corn, but we're not going to want to leave it out in the field any longer than what we necessarily have to because of some of the stalk strength concerns that we're starting to see here. So just want to encourage you to get out in your fields, take a look. If you have any questions about this or anything else you might be seeing out in your fields, feel free to reach out to myself or your local Beck's representative, and we would be happy to help. Thanks, and have a safe harvest.